Have you ever wondered what a creative director actually does and how you could become one if you wanted to? Maybe you want to work on film sets or activate spaces at conferences or concerts. Well, if you have that question, my guest, Edward Sanchez, today has been a creative director for over 10 years, working with churches, film companies, and brands like Lexus, North Face, and Red Bull. And today I'm going to be asking him all the questions that you might have about how to become a creative director. So welcome to the Blueprint Podcast on Architect Network. Let's get started. Well, welcome to the Blueprint, Edward. Super excited to have you on today, man. We've been friends for about a year now, met at church, and so excited to let people know what is a creative director. So let's just jump straight into it. What is a creative director, and what do you guys do?
That is a vast question.
Okay.
So it depends. It changes, per industry, various forms. A lot of them are in fashion. People know, sneaker companies, clothing brands, but they're all over. For art agencies, obviously advertising agencies.
Yeah.
Mad Men was really popular some years ago, and that's right. That's advertising agencies. So creative agencies typically have them as kind of in their top tier of leadership. So they typically a creative director, depending on what industry you're in the general sense. You have creatives that work under you to help execute whatever the deliverables are, right? In film, creative directors help the vibe and color of what things are going to look like, everything that all the pre-production that's gone on. So it's going to help the film and the director execute on the style that they're trying to do. More of what I do is definitely more in the art space and more of the art direction. So whether it's helping companies and organizations execute on their creative. So I don't do the marketing. I help create the content that companies use for their marketing and how they're going to do that.
So you're kind of like a designer to a degree, right? Like a set designer.
Sure, exactly.
Brand designer type of
Exactly.
thing?
Yeah, all of those would be in that realm. For sure.
So you're whatever project somebody's working on, a creative director is coming in and really helping them set the vibe, the design, and kind of the overall look for whatever that creative project is being created.
Exactly. I think about it. I was talking with a friend just the other day, and it's like Rick Rubin does. You know what I mean? He is this. I would consider him a creative producer, but in the music world, right? Like everyone laughs at that funny Anderson Cooper interview where they're like, well, what do you do? If you don't play the instruments, you don't do this and that, like, what do you get paid for? And he's like, my taste and the level of accuracy I help artists bring their greatest work out of them into the world. And that some people will think that's pretentious, but I think it's spot on. That's exactly what creative directors do. I mean, a lot of them are really talented designers first or filmmakers first. Certainly that was my background. And then they kind of branch out into other.
So that leads me into my second question is, I guess, how do you become a creative director? So you kind of mentioned there's certain disciplines that are maybe kind of feeders to that, because it sounds like it's a leadership position. Like it's not like just a one role does everything. You're a creative director. You really have a team underneath you. So like, how would someone who you kind of heard what you just described, if they want to become that, how would they get there?
Man, there's so many ways. My way was probably more unconventional. I didn't go to school for it. It was something, just always being, for a couple decades now, being in the creative world one way or another. Getting out of high school and being a kid in the 90s, growing up making skate films, taking photography, playing in bands. As a musician, always wanted to capture that. Got me into film and photography. And slowly kind of just went from there. So, starting out, just doing, like I said, marketing content for people in the early 2000s, show posters for touring bands and things like that, my friends' bands, album covers. And then, you kind of fast forward, really got into photography and cinematography a lot. And then, I think it's easy to have a passion for it when you are working in something that you have a passion for. So for me back then, I've always been someone who cycled and a runner. And back in the early 2010s, I started, really kind of getting into that, met some people, joined a running group. And slowly but surely, this running company, they promoted running events, basically trail running.
Okay.
So it was like very mountain culture, very outdoorsy, and then slowly started being their content guy. And then slowly they offered me a creative director position to handle
Was that
everything.
the first time that you were able to call yourself a creative director, or did you, in that transition, you're like, yeah, I'm a creative director, and like, okay, yeah, we'll hire you? Or were they like, hey, we're hiring you for this role, and that's when you just assume that identity?
That's something, and this is, I think everyone has a certain take on that. I'm a pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of guy.
Okay.
So some people will come straight out of art school and call themselves something. Some people will call themselves that at any point in time. Personally, and this is not to knock anyone's style, my lived experience has been that I wanted to earn that. And so for me, I never called myself that until the first time a client hired me for that role.
But you knew that you wanted to fill that role specifically, though?
I started to explore what that looked like. I was in that same vein of like, okay, cool. Well, if I don't only want to I have ADHD pretty terribly. And so for me, knowing, okay, I don't always only want to do photography and cinematography forever. I want to be able to do other things. I'm being a well-rounded artist. What does that look like? I started figuring out, oh, there's a creative director role. What does this look like? Oh, you get to work with all these different disciplines. Like that meets my ADHD credentials, right?
Yeah.
And then so that's what kind of led me into at least exploring what that could look like. But then it wasn't until someone said, hey, I need someone who has some experience who can help train and like kind of gather these other creatives and lead essentially what creative director does, no matter what industry you're in. They help lead the overall aesthetic for a campaign or a project.
Okay.
So at an agency, a creative director, under them they'll have multiple art directors, other associate creative directors, graphic designers, web designers, copywriters, all of those that's like that pyramid, right?
Okay.
Yeah, those are under the creative director kind of pyramid.
One of my questions was, what's the difference between a creative director and art director?
Yeah.
So we'll get into that in a little bit later, but I think you kind of just gave us kind of a preview of that. It sounds like the creative director is above the art director. So we'll dive into that a little bit later. Sure. I think that God has given us all the ability to be creative in some capacity. I think, God himself is a creator. He created this earth, everything we have. So he's a creative being. And so we have, we are made in his image. And so how are you able to use divine inspiration in your creativity, if that's even the way you think about it, in terms of, hey, are you using, your divine spiritual creativity and kind of the things that you do from a, professional level? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, only going off of my lived experience, I take my spirituality very seriously. And for me, it's, and I can say this now that I'm in my 40s, because my spirituality has also grown and morphed as I have as an individual. But for me, I don't really separate those two. I have this mentality that God is everything and is in everything. And so for me, it's how we're living our life, right? If you're doing marketing, helping entrepreneurs, or if you're a mechanic, if you're an accountant, right? We hear these things, and it's not to be trite, but I really feel like God is in everything, and we are just exploring where God is at and coming alongside that. Yeah. So we don't have to be, Christian graphic designers, where you can just be a graphic designer and knowing that, as a co-creator of your creator, you're this conduit for beauty in the world. Yeah. Wow,
that's good. Is that your philosophy on creative direction? Are you kind of exploratory in how you guide projects, or kind of what's your philosophy on that?
Yeah, for sure. I'm very collaborative. I've worked with other creative directors and even just directors in general who are very, tops down kind of leadership thing. And you'll never find me. It's rare that I'm on set these days, but if I'm ever on a project, it's never like, hey, everybody, here's exactly the way I want this. This is what we're doing. It's always gathering everyone in the room, down to like PAs and assistants and everyone, and saying, hey, here's kind of an idea. What does this look like? What does this look like for, you and you? Because everyone has a different experience, and everyone has different creativity to add.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
it's very individualistic, but when they all come together, it brings a commonality.
Yeah. As I was planning for this episode, I really kind of wanted to go in the creative direction, really dive into the creativity. But I think as I hear you're talking about this, I think leadership comes to mind, right? And like, how does someone become a leader? Because to be a good art or creative director, it sounds like you have to be a good leader. You have to be able to like lead a team and take ideas and, say no to things and say yes to things and like set the path, right? So talk about leadership development, someone who is a creative. I've noticed a lot of creatives have ADHD, and a lot of creatives are just like, they just want to be creative and create, right? But they're not really organized and structured, right? And so it sounds like you kind of have to have some corporate structure to being, so how do you balance that organized, but also being creative and just letting things happen and explore and co-collaborate like you described?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of that can come from, just a natural, sometimes people have a natural knack, right? With just gathering people.
Yeah.
When my wife and I work as a creative duo for our creative studio. And as we kind of got legit about it, over a decade ago, and really we're doing it full time. I think it was just something that you just naturally start being the overseer and kind of coordinator. Like, hey, can you help do this part? You're great at this. You're great at this. And really, it was hiring friends. Like, I met my wife when she was in art school, so it's like that was our dream always, was just to work with our talented friends.
Right.
And so it's like. And so I think naturally, as you start doing that develops you into, how am I helping someone realize their potential, which is what I think leadership is leading from the back.
Okay.
Not being the one, whatever derogatory, negative thing would be like cracking a whip, right?
Yeah.
Like being the one who's like, oh, these people are doing this for me. It's like, no, you're the one actually. At least in my experience, I like to view it as I'm serving my team by helping them with whatever tools they need, whatever inspiration they need, whether that's just helping them see what they're really good at, and maybe they're pivoting in their career. But it's a lot of it for me has just been coming alongside and helping raise people up, and I think that has been something that certainly. People who've hired me have seen that and said, oh, we actually don't have someone doing what you're doing. We have some people, we have a couple of creatives, we have a marketing team. Could you help us, could you help us make it cohesive? And then, and I think that's where, even for me, I started to be like, oh, well, maybe I am a leader type. I never thought of myself that way until someone called it out in me.
Okay. Got it. So it sounds like that for some people, it's like they don't even necessarily know they need a creative director, right? Until you get into it, you're like, oh, okay, we really need somebody to help wrangle this thing. Absolutely. So in terms of someone like you mentioned earlier, someone who is just coming out of art school, or they're a designer or videographer and they want to become a creative director, what are some of the things they can do to put themselves in position to fill that role? Because like you said, it's not just like being creative, like you've got to have the leadership. So I guess how can someone hone their skills to be ready for that?
Yeah, again, I had a really unconventional way about it, but I feel like, again, now having the experience talking to other people who did go to art school and stuff like that, it seems like the natural progression for that is to diversify, right? So a lot of people go for multimedia, right? Design. So that's usually graphic design and other things, copywriting. But if you can, you don't necessarily, some people are really good at one thing, and that probably helps, right? And then you can do some other things and diversify. But if you can really get a handle on design, through things like graphic design, brand design, things like that. For me, mine was cinematography. And photography were kind of my main things, and then I spread to doing things like illustration and it's graphic design, and then getting into copywriting some to websites and things like that. And so most creative directors will have a pretty wide breadth of what they can handle. They may only prefer one or two, but they've done a little bit of everything. So when something comes down the pipeline and someone says, hey, can you sign off on this copy? Can you help with copy on this campaign?
Mm-hmm.
You can do that. If you need to help refine visual identity for an organization, you can do that.
Okay.
If you need to direct photo and video shoots, you can also do that.
Okay.
So it's kind of having a wide breadth, but have at least one or two you're really strong in.
So to be a good creative director, you really need to be able to kind of person that can balance multiple things at once.
Absolutely.
You got to really be able to kind of be good at a lot of different things, be able to handle different aspects of a project at a time, being able to plug in, plug out. You know, you said, like you mentioned, you're not always on set, right? So being able to maybe lead from not even necessarily being there, right? So there's a lot, those are a lot of different skill sets. And I think what I'm hearing from your story, and as somebody who's watching this, they want to be a creative director. It sounds like you really need to put yourself in a lot of unique situations. You really just got to build yourself up. And, you know, there are some people who, like you say, who go straight into it. Hey, I'm a creative director, right? And they know what that means. They know what's required of them. But for a lot of people, I think it's just going to come from the experience and really putting yourself out there and looking for opportunities to add value in a lot of creative ways. And do you think that then, like, is there a threshold of how many different projects you should be a part of? Or is it just like, hey, whenever you feel like you're ready, just go for it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it depends what exactly that looks like for some of these people, right? So for some people, their dream is to be a creative director at an agency. And so at creative agencies or advertising companies, or marketing agencies, a lot of these will have creative director roles. Some people like think of it that black and white. I tend to not be, so dualistic with it. And so for me, I knew that, being a freelance creative director was more flexibility for projects, right? So I didn't have to be only doing marketing or only doing this. I could work not only on different styles of projects, but across different industries. So if I didn't have to go work for, because companies have them, Nike, big companies, Red Bull, they have creative directors over all of their different, brand units. And so you really, that can help most people focus and say, oh yes, this is what I want. I'm a sneakerhead. I want to be in sneaker industry. So I want to go do that. That can help. But also really it's just the time and experience. I think even when I got my first creative director gig, I didn't feel qualified. I took it because I'm a yes guy in that sense of just like, I can do it. I can learn it. Yeah. And so, opportunist, that's a good word. And so I said yes, but I also, that gave me the confidence that someone else saw it in me to say, hey, I could use your skills. You know what I mean? So it wasn't so much about the title so much as I had some experience by then. They liked the work I did and they liked how I worked with people. And working with people is, I would at least 50% of it. For sure is how you're working with people, what your vibe is when you're either in office, on set, over Zoom. How can you take feedback and also give good feedback is something that I'm still learning how to do, Because the ADHD thing just kind of makes it kind of impulsive where I'm just like, okay, why don't we scratch this? Let's move this, make this, brighter, And so I'm learning still, always just continuing to learn and grow. How am I being my best self as a creative and artist? And how am I helping others? Can do that too.
Well, thank you guys for listening today. If you have more questions about being a creative director or art director, drop those in the comments. We may need to do a part 2 because I think there's so much more to unpack about this creative director role. And so if you have questions, something that we didn't cover, something you wish we covered, put it in the comments and we'll definitely do episode 2. If you want to know more about Edward and see more of his portfolio, and if you have specific questions for him, we'll have his contact information in the description, a link to so you can see some of his work. So just feel free to take advantage of that. And thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys on the next episode.